Well, security is tight in the Swiss ski resort of Davos today ahead of the opening of the World Economic Forum. Davos is set to welcome the business and political elite for the conference next week. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, French President Emmanuel Macron, and key Middle East leaders are slated to attend the 54th annual WEF gathering, putting talks to end wars in Gaza and Ukraine at the top of the agenda. On this, we are now joined via video link by Dr Frederich Kirsten, School of Economics at the University of Johannesburg. Thank you so much for your time and welcome to the show. So South Africa has arguably, the continent's most diverse and industrialized economy. So one would imagine, that the country is probably hard at work to lure back investors. I mean, how should it position itself at the forum, just amid the energy crisis that we are facing, domestically, the wars in Ukraine and Russia, and the conflict in the Middle East that we are hearing will also be top of the agenda?
Yes, I think it's a very interesting time. If you look at the World Economic Forum, I think the main reason for going is to really attract investors to South Africa, and then to really say South Africa has all its ducks in a row. We are controlling everything nicely here, and that we can actually attract investors back to South Africa. Now, looking at that, how do we attract them? That is probably the question. And I think one of the biggest talking points here is the energy crisis, but also the investment in renewable energy. I think South Africa has a large potential here to attract investors for this renewable energy and transition plan that we have. And I think that's probably very important moving forward. But also within our fiscal policy frameworks, all of that is so important when you want to attract investors from these conferences and these forums, which are so important. So I think South Africa is on a mission to make sure we attract more investors, but I think it's so important to make sure the groundwork is laid there for them to actually come to South Africa and then invest business here to create jobs and to move the economy forward. How
important are some of these surveys that we are seeing during the rounds, particularly, in time of conferences like this? Because we understand, according to the WEF, South Africa's biggest risk of 2023 was state collapse. Now we understand that has shifted, and that the biggest concern now and the biggest risk in 2024 is the energy supply shortage. How then does the country begin to navigate those challenges while also trying to lure investment into the country?
So there's a popular saying in economics that within a crisis, opportunity arises. And I think this is actually what happened during the energy crisis. South Africa moved forward quite quickly with its renewable energy, with its investment in solar energy and so on, which I think has a large potential for investors. And investors are seeing it as a good investment opportunity moving forward. But again, South Africa still needs to attract those investors to actually come here and say, listen, there's now a strong private-public partnership within the energy market that we're developing, and there's a room for actually making profit in South Africa within an energy market, which I think will attract major investment into the country if you look at the reports. So I think that is one angle. You can actually use your crisis, your energy crisis, to the positive to say, but there's room now for a renewable new way of energy that can actually attract investment from outside South Africa.
I want to move into just some of the geopolitical, position of South Africa that has been, put to question and highlighted over the past few months. It started, of course, very prominently with Russia, and now, of course, the stand in terms of Palestine, in terms of South Africa taking Israel to the ICJ and accusing it of genocide. Of course, South Africa is now firmly on the world's map in terms of what is happening currently. How does South Africa then change perception or begin to position itself in terms of what it believes fundamentally, and also still trying to make sure that the economic position is something that comes out very strongly at this forum?
I think that is quite a big juggling act at the moment for South Africa, but I also think post-1994, South Africa has had a strong stance on where it stands regarding those issues. And I think the world knows it, and it hasn't influenced really the investment in the past, which I think moving into this World Economic Forum, it should not actually play too much of a major role, but those things will come up in these discussions. And I think that is so important for South Africa to navigate their way through these discussions and try to make sure they still attract investment from all over the world and not just one side of the world. I think that is still the biggest playing ground for South Africa to make sure they can attract investment from both sides and really make sure they align with where they stand, but also align economically where they can actually attract most investment. I think that's quite important.
Will issues like the AGOA, come into the fray here? Because, I mean, we know and we saw how the US has removed certain African countries, from AGOA. And of course, it's still, questioned in terms of will South Africa remain in AGOA and for how long will it be extended, etc., as it comes into, I think the period ends in 2025. Will that come up at all as South Africa tries to, navigate within these big world economies?
It might come up. But one thing I think that is quite fair to say is that everybody knows the US position and their stance on these geopolitical issues, and also South Africa's stance. And still there is discussions about trade agreements and moving forward with investment projects. So there is a stance, and it is then looked at from that point of view to really, but those types of discussions probably can come up in these forums to really see, okay, what is the intention behind this, where is this moving, and then to move together forward. I think that is one of the big themes within the World Economic Forum, is to move forward together and see if we can't have a cooperation within a fractured society, which we can currently see in the geopolitical scope.
I want to squeeze in this last question. Climate change. I mean, is that also expected to, to set the pace for the year ahead, while looking at some of the promises, especially made in COP28? The issue fundamentally here is the gap in funding for most countries and South Africa in particular.
Yes, no, that's definitely one of the biggest things coming up. Climate change, I think, is so important. I think it's something that will definitely be discussed in this forum, and I think something that is a long-term plan for most countries in terms of renewable energy investments, and something we'll have to focus on as South Africa to attract more investment coming to South Africa within the climate change renewable energy atmosphere.
All right, Dr. Kirsten, appreciate your time and your analysis. Thank you so much for that. Dr. Frederich Kirsten from the School of Economics at the University of Johannesburg there for us.